Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel in my survival world. My absolute two favorite things are reading stories from Reddit and doing chores on in my world. Today we will be reading about love stories to help you sleep and expanding on my farms, maybe get some cute cows and sheeps. Without further distractions, let's get into our first story. This one is from the user DaisyDuck22. I ordered DoorDash but got the love of my life instead. So, this all started almost 2 years ago, on one of those nights where everything was going wrong. I'd had a long day at work, got stuck in traffic, and by the time I made it home, the only thing I wanted was a warm meal and silence. So I pulled out my phone and ordered my comfort food, sushi, miso soup, and mochi. 30 minutes later, I get that beautiful notification. Your order has been delivered. I rush outside, grab the brown paper bag off my porch, and head back inside. But when I open it, I see tacos, like an entire platter of tacos. Beef, chicken, pork, salsa containers, the whole fiesta. For a second, I thought maybe DoorDash just blessed me. But then I checked the receipt stapled to the bag. Different name. Ethan, different address, one street over. I sighed. Normally, I just call DoorDash and let them fix it. But for some reason, I felt bad. The poor guy was probably sitting there, staring at my sushi, wondering why his tacos smelled like seaweed. So I texted the number on the receipt. Hey, this might sound weird, but I think I have your food. You by chance have sushi? He replied in under a minute. I knew my tacos looked suspiciously healthy. And that's how the conversation started, just stupid jokes about food. We both laughed about the mix-up and decided to meet halfway to swap. I put on a hoodie, grabbed the tacos, and walked down the block. He was already there, holding my sushi like it was a newborn child. When I saw him, I almost turned around. He was cute, like too cute for me to be standing there with messy hair and pajama pants. But he smiled, and I swear my brain short-circuited. We swapped bags, but then we just didn't leave. We ended up talking for nearly an hour, about food, bad DoorDash experiences, weird first dates, college, travel, everything. He was funny in that effortless way that makes you instantly comfortable. Eventually, he said, "Okay, I feel like I should at least get your name, Sushi Thief." So, I told him. Then he said, "Cool, I'm Ethan. Let's not wait for another delivery disaster to hang out again." I laughed it off, but the next day, he texted me a photo of a taco emoji and said, "Dinner Swap 2.0?" We met at a taco truck that weekend, and it was even better. We talked for hours again, sitting on a curb, sharing nachos like we'd known each other for years. After that, we just kept talking, texting every day, meeting up more. I found myself looking forward to his messages, the stupid memes, the random voice notes, the good morning texts that made my entire day better. About a month later, it was raining, and I got a text from him saying, "Hey, don't order food tonight." I got us dinner. 10 minutes later, he shows up at my door completely soaked, holding an umbrella and 2 takeout bags, sushi and tacos. He looked ridiculous, dripping wet but smiling like he'd just pulled off the best plan ever. We ended up eating together, watching a movie, and halfway through he reached over and held my hand. And that was it. That was the moment everything changed. Now, almost 2 years later, we still celebrate the DoorDash disaster anniversary. Every year we reorder the exact same sushi and tacos. We sit on the couch, watch the same bad movie, and laugh about how it all started with someone else's food order. Every time the DoorDash app sends me a notification, I can't help but smile. Because that night, I wasn't just delivered the wrong dinner. I was delivered the right person. Talk about a fairy tale story. That is awesome. What a wonderful way to meet someone. Maybe I will give it a try too. I don't go out much, but maybe there's still a chance. Alright, our next story comes from a user named KeyConfusion93. It's one of those situations that sounds like the beginning of a bad sitcom. A landlord messes up, 2 strangers get the same spare key, and somehow it turns into one of the sweetest love stories you'll ever hear. So last year, I moved into a new apartment. My first real place alone after college. It wasn't fancy, but it had this cute little kitchen and a window that overlooked the street. So I felt like I was finally living that adulting life. About a week after moving in, my landlord, Greg, the kind of guy who says "chief" a lot, dropped off a spare key. He said it was for emergencies and that he'd make sure the other tenants had one too. I didn't think much of it. Fast forward 2 weeks. It's a Friday night, I've got music playing, I'm in pajamas, and I've decided to make pasta because I was trying to feel accomplished. I'm stirring sauce when I hear the lock click. I freeze. Then the door opens. A guy, tall, holding a bag of groceries, steps in looking as shocked as I am. We just stare at each other for a full 5 seconds before he blurts out, who are you? I live here, I say, holding a wooden spoon like a weapon. Who are you? He looks at the key in his hand, then back at me. Okay, this is 3B, right? Yes. Cool, because Greg gave me this key, said it was the spare for my place. We both just kind of stand there in disbelief until it hits us. Our landlord gave us the same spare key. He backs up immediately, apologizing like crazy. I'm so sorry, I swear I'm not breaking in. I just wanted to drop these off before dinner. He holds up the grocery bag, which is full of frozen pizza, apples, and instant ramen. Definitely not a criminal inventory. I start laughing, the kind of laugh that comes from pure shock and mild panic. He laughs too, awkwardly scratching his head, and then says, well, since I already kind of broke in, should I at least help with dinner? I should have said no, but something about how embarrassed and genuinely nice he looked made me say, sure, just don't touch my sauce. His name was Aaron. He'd lived 1 floor down in 2B. Greg had apparently mixed up which spare went where, and Aaron had been walking around with access to my apartment for 2 weeks without knowing it. We ended up cooking together that night. I made pasta. He made garlic bread from the random ingredients he brought. We talked while eating on the couch using mismatched forks because I hadn't unpacked everything yet. He told me about his job at a print shop, his love for bad reality TV, and how he moved in after a breakup because nothing heals heartbreak like cheap rent and noisy neighbors. After that night, things just clicked. He'd stop by sometimes, after knocking, thankfully, with coffee or snacks. I'd drop off leftovers at his door. We'd hang out on the steps talking about work, about how Greg still hadn't fixed the flickering hallway light, about life in general. One night, after a particularly bad thunderstorm, my power went out. I texted Aaron, mostly joking that his break-in privileges might come in handy. He showed up 10 minutes later with candles and a blanket. We ended up sitting on my kitchen floor, eating cold spaghetti, laughing about how we basically met because of a landlord's mistake. Eventually, we started dating. It wasn't dramatic or fast, just easy. We already felt like we'd stumbled into each other's lives by accident, and everything after that just fell into place. A few months later, Greg called, apologizing for the key mix-up again. He said, at least it didn't cause any problems. Aaron was sitting next to me when I said, actually, it caused one. Now I can't get rid of him. He grinned and kissed my cheek, and Greg laughed awkwardly before hanging up. Now, we live together, intentionally this time. We still joke about the break-in that started it all. Every time I leave the house, I double-check the locks and say, you sure this is your key, right? He always says, guess I'll find out. I used to think moving into that apartment was just another step toward being independent. Turns out, it was the first step toward something much bigger. Sometimes the universe doesn't knock. It just walks right in with the wrong key and changes everything. Alright, our next story comes from an anonymous user. And honestly, this one feels like the kind of meet cute that could only happen in a romantic comedy. 2 strangers, 2 dogs, 1 big mix-up, and somehow it leads to love. So this all started one Sunday morning at my local dog park. It was one of those rare sunny days where everyone and their dog, literally, decides to show up. My golden retriever, Daisy, was zooming around living her best life, while I was sitting on a bench pretending to scroll my phone, but mostly people watching. About 20 minutes in, I noticed Daisy chasing another dog that looked almost identical to her. Like, same golden coat, same floppy ears, same goofy grin. They played together non-stop for half an hour. When it was time to go, I called out, Daisy, come. And, miracle of miracles, she actually listened. She ran right to me. I clipped her leash, gave her a treat, and we headed home. Everything seemed fine, until we got back. I let her off the leash and she just stood there. Then she barked at me, not in her usual friendly, play with me way, but like she was deeply offended. Then she ran straight to my couch, sniffed the cushion, and peed on it. Daisy never pees inside. I froze, looked at her, looked at the puddle, and that's when I realized that was not Daisy. This dog had slightly darker fur, a smaller collar, and a completely different energy. I had somehow stolen someone else's golden retriever. Panic set in. I grabbed my phone, ready to post a "help I accidentally dog-napped" message on the local Facebook group, when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. "Hey, I think you have my dog." My stomach dropped. I replied immediately, "And I think you have mine." Turns out the guy's name was Ryan, and he was the owner of Bailey, Daisy's identical twin in chaos form. We agreed to meet back at the park right away. When I got there, Ryan was already waiting, holding Daisy on a leash. She looked way too calm, like she was judging me for my mistake. I said, "I'm so sorry, I swear I'm not a dog thief." And he laughed. "It's fine," he said. "Honestly, Bailey looks like she'd happily go home with anyone who offers snacks." We swapped dogs, and both Daisy and Bailey acted like we were the weird ones for being confused. Normally, that would have been it. Awkward exchange. Both of us laugh, end of story. But Ryan didn't leave. He asked if I wanted to walk the dogs together for a bit, just to make sure they were emotionally recovered from the traumatic switch. Spoiler, the dogs were totally fine. We were the ones pretending to have an excuse to hang out. We ended up walking around the park for over an hour. We talked about everything: bad Tinder dates, the horrors of working from home, how both our dogs had a weird obsession with tennis balls. He was easy to talk to, and he had that dry sense of humor that makes every conversation feel natural. When it was time to go, he said, "Maybe next weekend we can meet here again. Make sure we actually bring home the right dogs this time." I laughed and said yes. That next weekend turned into every weekend. The dogs became best friends. And somewhere between all the shared walks, coffees, and accidental double fetches, Ryan and I started dating. A few months later, he joked, "You stole my dog to steal my heart." I told him, "That's a bold way of saying you lost your dog, actually." Now, a year later, we lived together, with Daisy and Bailey constantly causing chaos side by side. We joked that they orchestrated the whole thing because they were tired of us being single. Sometimes when I look at Ryan sitting on the couch with both dogs at his feet, I think about that day at the park, about how one little mistake, one leash clipped on the wrong collar, changed everything. I didn't just find my dog that day, I found the person who makes coming home feel like the easiest thing in the world. Let's move on to our next story. This one comes from a user named CerealBox91. It's one of those stories that starts with a simple annoyance and somehow turns into something way better than either person expected. It's got loud music, a passive-aggressive note, and an apology that turned into something a lot sweeter. I've always been the kind of person who listens to music too loud. Like, not Party Next Door, loud. Just enough to make the walls hum a little. It's my thing. Music helps me focus when I'm working from home. And honestly, it keeps me sane. I'd only been in my apartment for about 3 months when it happened. It was a Friday night, I had my speakers going, and I guess I got carried away. I was cooking dinner, dancing around my kitchen to the weekend, pretending my spatula was a microphone. Life was good. Then Saturday morning, I opened my front door to grab my mail, and saw it. A note, folded in half, taped right to my door. "Hi, neighbor. I'm glad you're having fun, but the walls here are made of paper, and your bass line personally assaulted my eardrums last night. Kindly turn it down." It wasn't mean, but it wasn't nice either. I felt that sting of embarrassment hit me immediately. My first instinct was to be defensive, like, okay, sorry for living? But then I thought about it and realized they were right. I had gotten a little carried away, so instead of writing a note back, I decided to apologize in person. I baked muffins. Okay, fine, I bought them and tried to make them look homemade, and grabbed a coffee from the cafe down the street. I knocked on 3B's door, ready to make peace. When it opened, I nearly forgot how to speak. Standing there was this guy, messy hair, coffee mug in hand, wearing the kind of lazy Saturday clothes that shouldn't look good but somehow did. He blinked at me and said, "Oh." The DJ I laughed awkwardly and said, "Yeah, guilty." I come bearing peace offerings. I handed him the coffee and the muffins. He looked surprised. "You didn't have to do that." The note was kind of passive-aggressive, I admit. "Kind of," I said, raising an eyebrow. He smiled. "Okay, very." We ended up talking for a few minutes right there in the hallway. He introduced himself as Jack. Turns out he just moved in too. I made some joke about us being the new noise pollution committee for the building, and he actually laughed. Like, really laughed. The next day, I found a note on my door. It said, "Coffee was great. Music taste? Still questionable. Let's discuss over brunch." I almost screamed. I wrote back, "Deal," and we met up that Sunday. That brunch turned into a 3-hour conversation. We talked about everything. Favorite songs, movies, worst dates, the weirdest neighbors we'd had. He told me he was a graphic designer, worked from home, and that he'd actually like my music, but his roommate, who was out of town that night, had been the one who left the note. I called him a liar, but he swore it was true. After that, we just kept seeing each other. Coffee runs, dog walks. Neither of us had a dog, we just borrowed the neighbors. Movie nights. It was easy, natural, like we'd both been waiting to bump into someone who got it. About a month later, I was playing music again, this time at a reasonable volume, when someone knocked on my door. It was Jack holding a small Bluetooth speaker. "Thought we could make it a duet," he said. We spent that night sitting on the floor of my living room, making a joint playlist, sharing songs that meant something to us. Every time I played something, he'd grin and say, "Okay, that's not terrible," and then counter with one of his favorites. That became our thing. Every week we'd take turns adding songs to our shared playlists. It grew with us. The inside jokes, the late night talks, the moments that started small but turned into something real. Now, 2 years later, we still live in the same building, just together this time. We still have the playlist, and every anniversary we play it from the beginning. The first track, the one that personally assaulted his eardrums. Turns out, love doesn't always start with sparks. Sometimes it starts with a noise complaint. Alright, our next story comes from a user named Spaghetti for Brains, and honestly, this one sounds like the kind of thing that only happens in movies. 2 strangers accidentally booked the same Airbnb for a weekend getaway, and instead of it turning into a disaster, it turned into something completely unexpected. So, last fall, I decided to take a weekend off and get out of the city. I had been overworked, exhausted, and pretty close to burning out completely. A buddy of mine told me about this little Airbnb cabin up in the mountains. No Wi-Fi, no cell signal, just a fireplace and peace. Sounded perfect. I booked it for 3 days, packed my camera gear, and drove up early on a Friday morning. The drive was beautiful. Fog over the lake, trees turning gold, all that cinematic fall nonsense that makes you think life's about to hand you some profound moment of clarity. What I didn't expect was to open the door and find someone already in the kitchen. She froze. I froze. It was like that scene in every horror movie right before someone grabs a frying pan. I finally said, can I help you?" She blinked and said, "Yeah, you can get out of my Airbnb." Turns out we'd both booked the same cabin for the same weekend. I checked my phone, and sure enough, my reservation was legit. Hers was too. The host somehow managed to double book it. We called the host, who apologized like their life depended on it and offered to refund one of us. But it was already dark, the rain was coming down hard, and the nearest hotel was miles away. So I offered a compromise. "Look, there's 2 bedrooms. If you're okay with it, we can both stay. I promise I'm not an axe murderer." She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but if you are an axe murderer, you're at least cleaning up your own mess." Fair. That night was awkward. We made small talk, mostly about how ridiculous this was, and then went our separate ways. I stayed up reading while she locked her door like she was prepping for the worst. The next morning, I figured I'd try to make things less weird. I cooked breakfast, bacon, eggs, the works. When she walked in, I handed her a plate and said, "Peace offering." She laughed and said, "You're bribing me with food. It's working." We ate together, and somehow the awkwardness disappeared. I found out she was there for the same reason I was, to unplug. She was funny, sarcastic, a little anxious, but in a relatable way. After breakfast, we decided to take a walk around the lake just to kill time. That walk turned into a 5-hour conversation. We talked about terrible bosses, bad exes, favorite music, and our shared hatred for people who don't use turn signals. It was one of those conversations where you don't even notice the time passing. That night, we made a fire and ended up drinking wine and listening to old songs on my phone. She told me about how her friends thought she was insane for going on solo trips. I told her they were probably right, but so was I. There was a moment sitting by that fire where I caught her looking at me. She smiled, then looked away, and I remember thinking, "Oh no, I'm in trouble." The next morning I made coffee, and when she came out, I asked if she wanted to exchange numbers. Just in case the host double books me again. She rolled her eyes, but gave me her number anyway. We texted on the drive home, then the next day, then every day after that. 2 months later, we met up again, intentionally this time. No cabin mix-ups, no broken bookings, just us. Now it's been almost a year. We still joke that our relationship was built on bad Airbnb management and shared bacon. Every time someone asks how we met, we say, customer service mistake. Sometimes the best things don't start with fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes it's two people trying not to be awkward about a double-booked cabin in the rain. Alright, let's move on to our next story. This one comes from an anonymous user. It starts in the most ordinary place, a grocery store checkout line. But what happens next turns a simple act of kindness into something way more meaningful. Let's get into it. It happened on one of those days where everything was already going wrong. I'd slept through my alarm, spilled coffee on my shirt, missed the bus, and by the time I got to the grocery store, I was holding it together with nothing but caffeine and denial. I was buying a few things, frozen pizza, cereal, a cheap bottle of wine. The kind of life's falling apart but I'm still trying haul. I got to the checkout, swiped my card, and declined. I tried again, declined. I laughed nervously and said, "Oh, that's weird." Tried a second card, declined again. Now the line behind me was growing. The cashier was giving me that polite but tired look, and I could feel the flush creeping up my neck. I opened my banking app, ready to die on the spot, when I heard a voice behind me say, "Hey, don't worry about it. I've got it." I turned around and there he was, this guy in a gray hoodie holding a basket of snacks and coffee beans. He smiled and said, "You can owe me coffee." "Fair trade," I stammered out. "Oh my God, no, you don't have to." But the cashier was already ringing it up. He slid his card, shrugged, and said, "Seriously, it's fine." Happens to everyone. I thanked him about 50 times while dying of embarrassment, but he just smiled and said, "Hey, just promise you won't ghost me on that coffee." He left before I could properly respond, and I stood there holding my grocery bag, feeling equal parts humiliated and oddly intrigued. That night, I told my roommate about it, and she said, "Well, guess you have to find him now." It sounded like a joke, until I realized I actually wanted to. So I went back to the store the next day. The cashier recognized me and said, "Oh, you mean Hoodie Guy? He's in here almost every morning for coffee." The next morning, I showed up early, pretending to browse the aisles. I felt ridiculous, like I was in some low-budget romantic comedy. Then I spotted him near the self-checkout, holding the same brand of coffee beans. I walked up and said, "Hey, funny running into you. I believe I owe you a drink." He smiled like he'd been expecting me. "I was starting to think you were going to skip out on our deal." We ended up grabbing coffee right after that. The conversation flowed so easily, it was almost weird. He was funny without trying too hard, kind without being awkward, and he listened. Like, actually listened. He told me his name was Ben, that he was finishing his master's degree, and that he'd almost skipped the store that day but ran out of coffee. After that, coffee became our thing. We started meeting up once a week, sometimes early before work, sometimes late at night when neither of us could sleep. We'd talk about everything, bad movies, childhood stories, the weird customers he dealt with at his part-time job. 2 months later, he invited me to a little bookstore cafe for fancier coffee, and that's when it stopped feeling like a coincidence. He'd brought one of the same coffee beans from that first day and said, "It felt wrong not to bring the one that started it all." We've been together ever since, almost 2 years now. He still jokes that my car declining was the best thing that ever happened to him. Sometimes I think about how easily we could have missed each other, how one small, awkward moment turned into a relationship that changed everything. I still have that original grocery receipt, folded and tucked inside my journal. It's faded now, but it's proof that the most embarrassing 5 minutes of my life somehow led me to my favorite person. And yes, for the record, I did pay him back. In coffee. Many, many times. Alright, our next story, and this one's kind of hilarious because it starts with something super relatable: missing socks. You know how you throw in a full load of laundry and somehow end up with one lonely sock at the end? Well, in this case, the mystery actually had a face. I'm not exaggerating when I say I thought my laundromat was haunted. For 3 weeks straight, every time I did laundry, at least one of my socks disappeared. Always one, never a pair. I'd check the floor, behind the dryer, even my car. Nothing. By week 4, I was down to mismatched socks in passive-aggressive size. The lady who ran the place said, "Oh honey, that's just the dryer eating them." But something about it didn't add up. My socks weren't disappearing randomly. They were vanishing from the same dryer every time. So, like any sane person with too much time and not enough patience, I decided to test my theory. I marked one of my socks with a little red Sharpie dot and put it in the usual dryer. Then I sat in my car outside and waited. About 20 minutes later, I saw someone walk in. A guy around my age, hoodie up, headphones in, holding a laundry basket. I didn't think much of it until I saw him open my dryer. He looked around, grabbed one sock, and tossed it into his basket like it was the most normal thing in the world. I jumped out of my car so fast I nearly tripped over my own shoe. I stormed in, pointed at him, and said, "Hey! Sock thief!" He froze mid-fold, staring at me like I just accused him of stealing state secrets. Then he looked down at the sock in his hand, the one with the little red dot, and his face went completely red. "I swear it's not what it looks like," he said. "I've been finding these random socks in my laundry every week, and I thought they were mine." I folded my arms. "So you just collect other people's socks?" He started laughing, this kind of embarrassed, boyish laugh that made it really hard to stay mad. I thought it was weird that I suddenly owned like 12 unmatched socks, but I figured it was the laundromat curse or something. I rolled my eyes but couldn't help smiling. "You mean my socks? You've been walking around with half my wardrobe on your feet." He grinned. "Guess we're soulmates then." I groaned so hard I almost left right there. But then he said, "Wait, hang on," and pulled out a small drawstring bag from his basket. He handed it to me. Inside were all my missing socks, neatly washed and folded. "I was gonna put up a sign," he said, "but now that I've been caught, I guess I owe you something better than an apology." He paused, clearly working up the nerve, then added, "How about coffee? I'll buy. Promise I won't steal your cup." I should have said no, but I was tired, amused, and honestly, he was pretty cute. So I said yes. We ended up walking to the cafe down the block, still laughing about how ridiculous the situation was. Over coffee, I found out his name was Evan. He was a design student who lived nearby, and apparently he'd been doing laundry there the exact same days I did for months without us ever noticing each other. That coffee as an apology turned into a weekly thing. Then, a few weeks later, it wasn't about socks or laundry anymore. We'd just meet up, coffee, lunch, late night takeout. 3 months later, we were officially dating. Now, a year later, we live together. And yes, we share a laundry basket. He still jokes that he stole my socks and my heart, which is both cheesy and technically true. Oh, and in case you're wondering, the first Valentine's Day gift he ever gave me was a pack of new socks. Every pair matched perfectly. Alright, our next story comes from an anonymous user, and this one sounds straight out of a movie. 2 strangers stuck in an airport overnight after a canceled flight. A long night of conversation and maybe a little unexpected connection. Let's get into it. It started with one of those announcements no traveler ever wants to hear. "Attention passengers, Flight 287 to Chicago has been canceled due to weather conditions." Cue the collective groan from everyone around me. It was already 11:30 p.m. and the terminal looked like a mix of disappointment and quiet rage. I had no choice but to wait until morning for the next available flight. I grabbed a corner near Gate 47, my new home for the night, and tried to make peace with my fate. I had my backpack as a pillow, a vending machine sandwich that looked like regret, and a dead phone. That's when I heard someone mutter, "This place feels like purgatory with fluorescent lighting." I looked up and saw this girl sitting a few seats away, cross-legged on the floor with a coffee cup and an open sketchbook. She had messy hair, oversized headphones around her neck, and the kind of calm you only see in people who've already accepted their suffering. I laughed and said, "You're not wrong. I think I've aged 5 years since that announcement." She smiled. "Well, at least we're aging together." Her name was Lily. She was an art student heading home after visiting her sister. We started talking, first about how cursed air travel is, then about random stuff like favorite comfort foods and weird childhood memories. Somehow, it never felt forced. After about an hour, the janitor walked by and turned off half the lights in the terminal. The place got quieter, softer. It felt like the world had paused just for us. She pulled a blanket out of her bag and said, "You look cold." "You can share if you don't snore." "I don't," I lied. We ended up sitting side by side on the floor, wrapped in that tiny blanket that definitely wasn't designed for two people. We watched planes being de-iced through the window and played this dumb game where we guessed where people were flying based on their outfits. Around 3 a.m., she pulled out her sketchbook again and said, "You've been talking for hours." "Hold still." She started sketching me. I tried to stay still, but she kept laughing because I'd make faces to mess her up. She drew anyway. When she was done, she flipped the page around, and honestly, it was good, like unfairly good. "That doesn't even look like me," I said. She smirked. "It's the version of you that looks less sleep-deprived." We kept talking until the intercom crackled back to life around sunrise. The first early flights were boarding. The airport slowly came alive again, but it felt like we were in our own little bubble, and I didn't want it to end. When they finally announced her flight, she stood up, stretched, and handed me the sketch. "Here, proof this night wasn't just a dream." I looked at it, then back at her. "You realize this means I owe you one now." She tilted her head. "One what?" "Breakfast. It's the least I can do after you immortalized my sleep-deprived face." She laughed and wrote her number in the corner of the drawing before heading toward her gate. "Then you better call." "I want pancakes." And yeah, I called. A week later, we met up for breakfast, then dinner, then another breakfast. That was a year ago. We still joke that our relationship started in an airport terminal, possibly the least romantic place on earth. But somehow it worked. Now, whenever one of us hears an announcement about a delayed flight, we just look at each other and say, "Gate 47. It's our thing now." Let's move on to our next story. This one comes from a user named SpicyTacos88, and it's honestly the kind of meet cute you'd only expect in a bad romantic comedy, except it actually happened. Imagine accidentally stealing someone's bed while traveling, and instead of getting yelled at, you end up meeting someone who completely changes your trip. Yeah, this one's good. It happened last summer while I was backpacking through Europe. I was tired, broke, and running on instant noodles and poor planning. I just arrived in Prague after a 10-hour train ride, and all I wanted was to crash. I checked into a hostel, one of those cheap but quirky ones with murals on the walls and signs that said things like "good vibes only." The receptionist gave me my room key and told me I was in bunk number 8. I dragged my backpack upstairs, found bunk number 8, and immediately face planted into the mattress. It was perfect. Cool air from the fan, faint smell of detergent, and silence. I passed out in seconds. I woke up around midnight to someone shaking my shoulder. Hard. Hi, I think you're in my bed." I blinked, confused, and sat up to see this girl standing beside the bunk with her phone flashlight pointed directly at my face. She looked not happy. "What?" I mumbled, still half asleep. "My name's on the sheet for bunk number 8. You're in my bed." I fumbled for my phone and checked the little note from the receptionist. And that's when I realized my mistake. I was supposed to be in bunk number 6. I groaned. "Okay, wow, my bad, sorry." Total zombie moment. She crossed her arms. You think? I scrambled out of bed, tripping over my backpack and smacking my head on the bunk above. She laughed, not meanly, but in that you're an idiot kind of way. Nice entrance, she said. I try to make an impression, I replied, rubbing my forehead. Since it was late and the room was full, she sighed and said, Look, it's fine. Just stay here tonight. I'll take the spare one. You already drooled on this pillow anyway. I froze. I didn't, she grinned. You totally did. We both laughed, and that pretty much broke the tension. Her name was Claire. She was from Toronto, traveling solo for the first time. She climbed up to the spare bunk, and we ended up whispering back and forth in the dark for hours. Turns out, we'd been on the same train earlier that day. We'd even shared a platform without realizing it. By 3 a.m., we were talking like we'd known each other for years. Travel stories, family drama, favorite snacks. Nothing was off limits. I told her I was heading to Vienna next, and she said she'd be there the same weekend. The next morning, we grabbed breakfast together at the hostel cafe, just coffee and those cheap pastries that crumble into a million flakes. She teased me the whole time about stealing her bed, and I promised to buy her a new pillow to make up for it. We ran into each other again a few days later in Vienna, completely by chance. It was one of those no-way moments where you start laughing because it feels like the universe is messing with you. We decided to hang out. Lunch turned into exploring the city, which turned into watching the sunset along the Danube. By the end of the night, it didn't feel like coincidence anymore. After that, we just kept finding reasons to cross paths. Budapest, Florence, Paris. By the time my trip ended, we'd spent almost half of it together. When I got back home, she texted me a photo, her hostel bunk in a new city with a note that said, "Wish you were in the wrong bed again." A few months later, I flew to Toronto. We've been together for 2 years now. We still joke about how I broke into her bed on the first night we met, and every time we stay somewhere new, she insists on checking the bunk numbers herself. Can't say I blame her. Well, that is it for all the stories I have today, if you're already asleep. Well, good night, and for the rest of you, be sure to hit the subscribe button. It ensures you don't miss an uploads and future stories to come, and it helps me and the channel a whole lot. Thanks again, everyone. See you tomorrow.